Hello, Trevor.
Hey, Jeff.
Okay, so you just laid on me a premise, a thesis, about D&D being an American. So go ahead and state your I won't say problem statement, but your thesis statement or whatever that's called.
Well, I would guess it would be closer to a supposition. Let's go
Supposition.
with that.
Okay,
Yep.
supposition.
Let's start with that, right?
Okay.
So I have heard it said by several individuals, just through listening to podcasts and reading, gaming related blogs and things like this, and it comes up in discussion that D&D is a very, not just Western, but a very American game. That it is essentially a Western in a medieval setting, and that the method, if you hear me out on this, if you think of the original way in which XPs were awarded, the reward system of the game, right? You got rewarded stuff for looting things and taking gold.
Yeah,
that's a very capitalist, American way to deal with things. And so, yeah, I think there is some merit there. I'm not sure it was a thought out premise.
No, I think it is. I think it's thoroughly there. And I'll tell you why, because I think there's another supporting thing that augments it, in that it is by a kind of, we'll say, default medieval, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very romantic view of medieval history.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when you look at what the Europeans do, when they look at their own history, it's not a clean, shiny place.
No. No. And I can tell you that, I like we had been talking about, I lived in England for about half of my childhood, and I go back every couple of years for about a month at a time. And, they are in direct contact with the physical proof that shows them that life was not, it's very hard to romanticize that when you walk through an actual castle, or, and you stand on the battlements and you look out at Stirling Castle in Scotland and see what it is that they would have seen. Yeah. Now, obviously parts of their history are romanticized, right? And so the way they look at kind of ethnic relations and things like this, here's an interesting story. In 2017, I went to England twice, and I went to Norway once. And I was in Norway for a week, had a great time, went into Oslo, took a train to Bergen, took a boat down a fjord in the process and everything. It was beautiful. But I got to go to a couple of really awesome Norwegian museums. They had several Viking ship museums and everything, and they have a Kurt von Daniken. They had a von Daniken museum that I wandered into with Kon-Tiki and everything and stuff like this, and Kon-Tiki too. And so when you go to the State Museum at Edinburgh for Scotland, they talk about the Viking incursions into Scotland, and it's very clear that they feel that they were invasions, right? When you go to Norway and look at those very same events, historically preserved with treasures and everything in both places, you go to that museum and they're like, and we just went out and had a great time, and it was it was so cool, and we got to meet our friends, and we got to visit new places, and it was our given, we went.
It's a cultural exchange.
That's right. We brought a couple people back and some stuff, right? It was an extended vacation, and so the viewpoints are very, very polarized, different, and one group clearly did not enjoy that encounter, and the other group thought it was a great time. And so I do think that plays back to D&D, that fantasy setting was very romantic.
Poverty, there's a lot of disease, and also the nobles really weren't. I'm sure they kept order, but I don't know that people were really over enamored with the whole feudal system.
No, I don't think so. But at the time, it's pretty clear that was one way to keep order. It didn't work great, but in an evolving system, and and that's what we evolved out of, right? That's where the Magna Carta comes from. That's where, all of these documents that essentially found what is ultimately, American doctrine, right?
Right.
I mean, we still have laws that refer to the Magna Carta.
Yeah, I'm not really necessarily saying as far as that, but I mean, as far as like the life of, like, what does it mean? It's not as pleasant. It's not as shiny. And I think we tend to glamorize, where if you watch like Monty Python and the Holy Grail,
yeah,
or or is it Warhammer?
Oh, absolutely, right.
Yeah, it's like Ratcatcher, that kind of stuff. It's like they really don't, it is not as the England they play in, or the not England they're playing in, is much different than the not England that we play in.
True, I would agree.
And it's like going back to Greyhawk, because it's like it's like if you're going to Greyhawk, because they had all those kingdoms, and you could break everything down, but I don't know that there was ever any sort of guidelines. Everything was kind of, it seemed like you were either in a territory that was, all the nobles were good and everybody was great, and then you're just fighting bandits, or the region was full of like chaotic evil beings that were trying to overtake the world.
Right. It's a very simplistic way of building a fantasy environment, and if you think about it, it's kind of like one of the things. I play Warhammer 40,000. I haven't played it in years, but I collect it and have a lot of it. And one of the things you talk about when you're thinking about miniatures on tabletop and what they look like is they need to have a specific profile so they're easy to see and distinguish. And so these countries have these easy to see profiles, right? And they're instantly recognizable with just a couple sentences. I know what I'm going to expect there. And you're right. It's either they're very polarized. And compare that to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, especially the first edition. And everything is downtrodden, and it is dark and grim, and you are probably going to die quickly. But there are ways to progress, and stuff. But it's much more complicated than D&D, which from the very white box, and everything rule set on. I mean, you look at Greyhawk, the first supplement, and they talk about, this is when you get your you get your title and you get your Grand Duchy, and it's very
right.
romanticized, and they're built in to character. Actually, this ties in really nicely with an article that we just published for Tales from the Smoking Wyrm #4, talking about organizations. And we looked and spent some time talking to people all the way back into the, who were there in the 70s, but also there in the 80s and 90s and aughts, at the way organizations are presented in D&D and in fantasy games in general. And if you go back and look, it's implicitly organizations exist all the way through that. And even though they're never defined, right? And so, yes, the same stuff is true when you're getting your Grand Duchies and everything. They're embedding your character into the milieu of the environment, but it is incredibly romanticized.
Well, I think what also, to me, I find it's going to be the long way around. But one thing I found kind of shocking, when I say shocking, I'm not talking about intellectually shocking, but just, when you hit a reality hits you, but it's, with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine,
right?
There are Russians going into towns, and you can see conversations where the Russian residents are talking to the Russian soldiers. They speak the same language. They share the same culture. And I thought,
well, they had that imposed on them, right?
Yes, I'm not necessarily going.
But historically,
right.
The Ukrainians spoke Ukrainian, and when they were brought under by, by the royalty, right, by the Russian royalty, and brought to heel and made part of Russia, that was outlawed. And so, right. Yeah, so they speak. I mean, Russian.
But just the fact that you can have a war where you're attacking other people. I'm not saying that the history, but just the idea, like, I'm talking to you and we speak the same dialect. We understand each other. We say the same culture, and I'm, shelling you, I'm sending tanks, whatever. And I thought, other than like the Civil War, pretty much every war we fought for hundreds of years has been with people we don't share the same language with.
Certainly from an American perspective. Yeah.
Right. It's for us. And I think, and even a lot of times it's people that are like of different cultures.
Yeah.
And I thought, but Europe, even though they did speak different language, but they still like all the royalty related, the Latin, the French, whatever there was language that they could all speak. They did share a common heritage a lot of times in some of these areas, but even the principalities within like a region, they would go to war. Like there really was no, like we look at alignment being a certain thing, like lawful good or lawful neutral or neutral good, but what does that really mean? And in real life, these people were just petty people. There were no ruler. I don't think there's any rulers that were really truly like we define as lawful good. And it seems like there was always, even within people who were shared borders within the same, I don't want to say nation because that all kind of varies, but in the same nation, let's say, they were at war with each other and they would betray each other and they would help it. And I'm thinking, really, if you look back, it was messy. It was messy. Where now we look at Greyhawk and everything's like, oh, it's very clean. These are very clean political lines. Seems like, a country is homogenous and they're unified. But really, it's probably a mess, and there's probably only a few people really holding the thing together, or it's all going to, fly apart.
Right.
We don't really get that.
But that's also not the central story.
Oh, it isn't.
Right.
But that's what I'm saying. I think it's Americanized in that way.
Yeah, you're meant to travel through these things like you're moving from Deadwood to Santa Fe.
Yes,
and so you will interact with a barkeep, and you'll interact with the barmaid, and you'll interact with maybe the town mayor and some of the people like an herbalist and an alchemist or something and a shopkeeper, but you're not really mostly embedding yourself in what's going on. But the interesting thing is to me, that's the kind of the fun part of the game, is getting players who are willing to really settle down. I mean, my current group, we've been playing DCC now for 4 or 5 years, and they keep settling down, right? So they'll clear out, we'll even if it's a pre-published module, we've done several of those, but the players will say, okay, we've cleared out this dungeon. This looks like it's a good place we could live, and and then they settle down and they create a base out of that, and they take up the vacant houses, and then and then what I'm doing is, and what my other players, when they're sometimes running the story as well, they're creating relationships with NPCs and stuff, and yeah, so that's kind of a lot of fun storytelling there if you get into that aspect. But it's certainly not what the game is designed for.
No, I think it's like America, like you said. We're going to whatever town, this state, going to a different town, a different state, and we will be treated. And a thing too, it's like, people don't want to necessarily get into racism or prejudices, but those types of things existed. To go to different areas, you carry with you an accent, and you're like, oh, you're the untrustworthy people from the West, or you're the but we don't do that. Everybody's just kind of just wanders around and without any sort of hesitation. And I don't know that we really wanted, our games to evolve around that, but I do think it does tie in what you said, is the game is really an American, is very much an American view of things.
Yeah. And again, it's focused on, it's almost focused on capitalism, right?
Oh yeah, exactly.
And so, so what I find interesting is that there is a whole burgeoning group of people, and it's not just a new trend, who are bucking that system and saying, there's way more we can do with this. And you've interviewed several of them, people who are, creating role-playing games that have entirely different intents and purposes and stuff. But that said, most of us fall back on just a couple of different games that we pretty much religiously play for the rest, for our lives, or as long as we're gaming.
Yeah. So, and I think too, it also, I used to kind of poo-poo the XP, go for XP, but then, somebody also said, well, but if that's the case, there's less reward for killing monsters and more reward for getting their treasure without getting caught, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But it does change the game. It's interesting what rewards you have, because we're economic animals. Was it Homo economicus? We're driven economists, each one of us, to further our own ends. And it's interesting how whenever you create whatever that reward is, it will create different forms of play and behavior.
Right. And so, if you think about it, an XP system is in and of itself an ethics system, right? And you drive play by altering an XP. You can clearly drive play by altering an XP system. So, characters, no longer, like, I don't give out gold, XPs for gold or anything like that. And sometimes characters leave things behind that they could benefit from, right? Simply they look at it and say, oh, that's just going to burden me, or that's something that's going to take too much time away from what I need to focus on. And so, you can clearly alter the XP system as a game master, as a judge, and change your players' behaviors. And that has real benefit, actually. Years ago, right at the advent of cell phones, I hate cell phones at a gaming table, or any devices at this point. And so, this is even before cell phones, now that I think about it. I was having a couple problems with a couple of players, and I devised, I hacked the 3rd edition D&D XP system, and basically said, okay, any given encounter, I'm going to give you a card. And I don't have one sitting here, but I have boxes of these things. And it was just a little card, a little bit, about half the size of a business card, had a little formula on it. And it was like, I was giving rewards I was rating you based on how well you role played your character, kind of a most valuable player reward, whether or not the player was paying attention at the table, right? Because we had a couple problem players who would zone out and ignore the game, and we probably should just ask them to leave. But I just simply tailored the XP system, and suddenly they were very focused, right? Because they could see that I would hand out a reward and say, well, you were very disengaged, right? The point of us getting together and telling a story is getting together to tell a story,
right?
It's I'm not a movie theater, right?
Right.
And then in basically inventiveness. So people who came up with inventive solutions on how to solve a problem, whatever that was, those got added together, and then they got multiplied by your level, basically, and that gave an XP reward. And and I'd mapped it. If you look in the back of the first 3rd edition DMG, Monty Cook specifically talks about XP progression and through levels, that the average level level increase should result from about 13 encounters. And so I'd sat down, and literally I could show you in an Excel spreadsheet, here is the standard encounter curve, and here is the encounter curve if you average on these things. They mapped really quickly, really closely. And so you can hack that system and change the economy of the game without changing anything else.
I just found I just don't want to think about it.
That's why you buy a zine that has it already all thought out.
No, I mean, at the end of the game, I just want to say, okay, everybody gets 5 experience points. Let's go on.
And that's what I do these days. I'm like, So, and that comes back to that's actually kind of a bastardization of like the storyteller system, right? Where basically you got between 2 and 4 XPs per game session, and things kind of all worked off that. And if it was a really good game session or a really important game session, you might get 7 XPs. That was an end of a massive, chapter or book or whatever. You were going to get a lot of XP reward for that. And so, that's a nice, easy way to do it too.
The thing I find is, I think what makes it hard about D&D is that there's such a delay between levels. And it's like, there's no candy in between. So it's like, there's only candy on the weekends. You don't get candy throughout the week. I kind of enjoy systems where it's incremental. Maybe each game system, you get something and a skill goes maybe up a little bit, or you can get a little something where it's still the results probably, similar in the end, but it's, but I do find that it seems like sometimes it takes a long time to finally get that thing. Then usually about that time, the adventure's over, and then you really didn't really do that much with it. You know what I mean?
Sure. I agree. I am not a big fan of levels. I liked Chaosium system where it's all skill based and it's just, did you use it, roll above it, and you go up like up to 10 points and it gets harder as you go. That's a really great system for skills if you have a skill based system. I really like games that reward XPs and then allow players to, just tweak their character every session or two with, I'm going to increase this skill, I'm going to spend up, and I'm going to increase my stat, and that's going to affect many skills and things like this. That's a World of Darkness system. You can see that in Warhammer Fantasy and things like this. Those are really nice systems. And what I think is those systems have a very organic way for characters to progress and become very customized to that game, right? Because you get all these choices all the time, and the investment to usually increase anything is only like 3 or 4 sessions at most.
Right.
You can save up your XPs and throw it into something big, but then you get it, and that's usually a lot faster than going up in a leveled system. So yeah, I much prefer not having levels. They don't help me much.
Have you played any of the Cypher system games like Numenera?
No, it's something that we just haven't gotten to.
So it does something really kind of crazy in that you hand out during the gameplay, at the end of the session, and even you hand out XP, but also in the game, if you want to mess with a character as a GM, you do what's called an intrusion, and you will hand you'll hand the person some XP, 2 XP. If they choose not to have you mess with them, they have to pay you an XP. But if they allow you to do it, they get 2 XP, and one of them they get to hand to another player.
Okay.
The XP you can use to either at the end of between sessions, you can improve your character, or in game, you can spend it to improve your chances of a roll.
Okay, so it functions sort of like karma.
Yeah, and I thought, in a sense, like it's kind of like, but what it does is you can have a character who could be very conservative, and their reward is their character getting better, or they can use it, they can just blow it all every game, and they still get to be kind of cool. So
right.
I was like, that's kind of an interesting way of looking. But of course, the whole system is based around, this is not something I don't think you could port to like DnD, but it is an interesting thing where you as a player, you can influence a die roll, or you can just not, or split it out however you want. And there's opportunities. And if you as a GM want your players to have more XP, you can mess with them more, and they will not be upset with you because they are implicit to this whole thing because they didn't pay you off.
They bought into it.
Yeah, and I think some people kind of think they like the idea where I'm the GM and I'm going to determine what happens. And I think what this allows you to do is just say, you know what, this is kind of weird now, the blue, and then it's not like you're screwing with them. You know what I mean? It's actually like, yeah, I get a reward for this. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm game.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, and anytime you can hand, as a judge, anytime you can hand some partial narrative control over to players, your players will thank you, and usually they will do cool things with it, and you will be entertained just as much as they will.
Yeah, because what you couldn't do is what they call a player intrusion. Is the player could say, "Hey, how about you give me some XP and let's just have this happen."
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. I was, Monty Cook, started at ICE, Iron Crown Enterprises, working on Rollmaster stuff, and then moved over to D&D with third edition. But and there was an interview at some point where he admitted that even though he was, had written the DMG and was running third edition and everything, he ran third edition with an open D20. So in Rollmaster, you can continue to roll up, and you could. That's theoretically unlimited, right? You could get a roll of a 600 or 700 on a percentile roll, and you could also get a roll of like negative 600, right? You could really, really mess up, and so and all that was determined by tables. I thought that was a really interesting idea, and I spent some time, late in third edition when I was almost done playing with it. I hadn't realized that at the time, and we hacked that system. And what I did was I said, okay, so you have a target number. A player has a target number, and for every 5 points you beat that target number by, you gain an advantage, and for every 5 points you go below it, you gain a disadvantage. And those can be played out. And we basically had a list. We took the conditions in third edition, and we were like, so if let's say you're attacking somebody and you botch the roll, right? So you got 2 or 3, thresholds of 5 below your target number, then you have to narratively explain to me what happens to that character. And you could say, oh, well, I'm swinging my axe and I accidentally, I trip on something on the ground and my axe hits the player character next to me, knocking him prone. And then, I follow through, but my axe, the head of my axe goes flying across the room, rendering that weapon unusable. And then I trip and fall on the ground, right? And so, and players were required to determine what was going to happen in that fumble. It was totally up to them. There was a list of things they could choose from. I did not interfere in any way. I was like, okay, that's what happens. And then the same thing was true when we got a really good roll. They would go over and they could say, oh, this is where you can add dice to damage, or you not only hurt the major opponent, but you accidentally catch the guy behind him. And, so there was lots of narrative control there for the player too. And boy, that really generated very interesting combats. The players were very focused on that game, and they had a lot of fun, I think, in the play tests that we did on it, working it out. So it was a really interesting system. I have never done anything else with it, but
what I'm going to say is it's kind of interesting because I think there are some systems that you do that basically it's fun for the one player, but boring for everybody else.
Yeah.
But there's also some systems I've noticed, and I imagine this is one of them, but also I noticed the way it works with Cortex is that it seemed like whenever there's bonuses to spend, everybody gets involved and everybody starts talking about it because it can influence everybody else and what happens with them. So all of a sudden, I've got these bonuses. Let's, as a table, talk about this. If we can make this happen, I could follow up with this, or if we do this. And I think that's where it becomes interesting, where it's all in the open. We can choose. Let's all talk about this, and people naturally, I think, it pulls everybody together rather than just everybody falls asleep while one guy's pouring through a long list of things.
Right. And so that's exactly right. So if you rolled well, you could set up an opponent for your buddy to then do something in addition to doing whatever it was you were trying to accomplish. And so I thought that was a really cool system. Like I said, I haven't done anything with it in a couple of years, but maybe I'll dust it off and make it a little zine or something and publish it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was a cool idea.
I'm wondering too, is, the other thing would be is not to push in direction, but have you maybe use something like the age system?
The what?
Age. They use 3D6.
I've never played Age. I've never played Dragon Age or whatever the modern version of it is.
Yeah, Expanse is one of them. So I think you roll, it's a 3D6 system, but the idea is if you one of these is a colored, but like, just to simplify it, what you could do is you could roll whatever he does, you roll, and then maybe instead of every 5 points, maybe if you succeed by at least 5 points, then you roll a d6, and that's how many little action points you get.
Sure. Yeah.
And then
so there's an infinite
out.
way. There's an infinite number of ways to hack that once
Right.
you accept that players get to determine some of their fates. And I find, like I said, I find that if players get to tell me what it is that happens to their opponent, they're super eager to do that. And I just honestly don't care. I mean, I think that's great.
Well, and I think it also shows trust too at the table. And that's the other thing that's key when you start dealing with this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's be honest. As a game master, I've never been in a situation where I couldn't immediately kill the party whenever I wanted to.
Yeah. But they also feel fine to say, but if he says, I'm fine with saying my X head breaks off and I fall down.
Yeah.
They're also trusting enough of you. It's like, okay, I'll just tear up your character sheet. I mean, not that you're not going to create a complication, but you're not going to also be the kind of guy that just, puts a screw to a 7th level character and kills them off immediately or whatever it may be.
No, because, I want, the truth is in reality, death is usually meaninless.
It's boring.
Is boring. And it happens when we least expect it. At least we could hope so. And so, yeah, in a, this is a fantasy, right? And you want a character death to be useful for the party in that it's entertaining and it tells a story, or it gives a good culmination to a story, and the player feels like, oh, that was a great story arc, right? That's the point of doing these things, other than just hanging out and having an excuse to talk.
Yeah, well, there's, I think, even cool things you could still do. Like, I kind of mold this in my mind. Maybe it makes it a little bit harder to pull this off with a D&D type game, but you could also say you're dead, but you're actually not going to die till the end of combat, and then you're dead.
Sure.
That's and then you still can be participating, you can be heroic, and you can maybe even sacrifice,
Yep.
Or you could just say you sort of suffer a moral wound at the end of this adventure, you're dead.
Yeah.
And
so, absolutely. And those, so that is a trust system with a judge, right? The group's got to trust that you're going to help them carry off a story, and the group, hopefully trusts that you're going to be entertaining, but not predictable.
Right.
And so, the biggest compliment that I've ever gotten from a game or from players is, I'd love to play in that game because you never know what's going to happen. Right. And if you never know what's going to happen, that means that you're always at the edge of your seat waiting to see what does happen, because the game is truly interesting.
Yeah, that's what we all want, GMs and players.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be just as surprised as players. And as a player, I want to be surprised, right? And befuddled.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So yeah, I think it's just amazing all the opportunity. You're right. There is a lot of opportunities out there for making things that are otherwise boring more exciting.
Yeah.
But where I really want to talk to you, this is not going to be a dovetail, is that you've got a Kickstarter.
I do have a Kickstarter going right now. I think we're in day 2, aren't we? Yes, we just went into day 2.
So there's a very specific thing I'll ask you. So you are making coins.
I am making coins.
And so I was reading the coins. You're saying you're using the lost wax process.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been dying to use this for decades. Okay. So how can you be using this process if the process is lost?
Oh, it's a good question. So what happens is you make a mold using something that has been cast in wax.
Yeah, the wax is what's lost, not the process.
The wax is what's lost, not the process, right? And what's really interesting is what we're essentially. So my goal in producing things for role-playing games is I want to produce beautiful, elegant solutions to problems. Right. I want my products to be beautiful. I want them to be elegant. I want the stories to be good and entertaining, but I want the physical thing to look great, and as well. And I have kind of a specific way of looking at that. You should be unique. And then the same thing is true with props. I have a deep love of trinkets and props and things that I can hand players if I can ever do that. And I find that some systems obviously are more prop driven than others. Call of Cthulhu has a huge abundance of prop potential built into it, and there's a deep market for that, and people love props. And whenever we play Call of Cthulhu, I try and utilize those props as much as possible. They're just fun to be able to hand ephemera or newspaper clippings around to players instead of just, here's the photocopy out of the module that you're going to look at. I'd like to be able to hand them something that looks genuine. And so the coins, we wanted to basically create coins that are made of real metal. Now we're not there yet. We're not going to make them out of real metal just no matter what. That's a stretch goal, right?
Right.
We're starting with a 3D sculpted. So what started as a 2D illustration by an artist was then 3D sculpted by another artist. And and basically people are purchasing coins knowing that at the beginning, until we get to 400 coins, at the beginning, they're going to be 3D prints, and they can paint them and they can make them look metallic or whatever they want, and everything. And then as we move forward, if we can get to 400 coins, that allows me to transform that amount of money into the equipment and materials I need to set up a lost wax foundry.
So I learned about lost wax process, it's probably 30 years ago.
Sure.
So, and it's a little bit different than the traditional form. So explain what exactly does it mean to use a lost wax? Because the process isn't lost. It's the wax, the way it's being utilized and it melting out. So how do you make a coin using a lost wax process?
So what we do is we take a 3D coin, we print it, we make a mold of it, and you can do that with normal silicone. And then we take that mold and we inject it, instead of with more resin or something like that, we inject that with wax.
Yes.
Right. And so we have a wax injector. There's a little machine you can get that helps you make these perfect injections. You can make a couple every couple minutes, right? So if you had 2 or 3 molds, you could basically sit there and fill it, set it aside, fill it, set it aside, fill it, set it aside, break those open. You could have somebody else helping you do that, right? They could break that apart, recover the piece, which is now a wax cast of the coin. And then you make a stem, right? And you attach those coins, those wax replicas of the coins, to the stem. And then you encase them in a special type of plaster Paris, essentially, that it takes heat, has lots of micropores in it and everything, so you can put it in a vacuum system, so that when you then pour your metal in to this system, which is the wax tree with all the coins encased in this plaster, on a vacuum, the metal is pulled down into the voids, and because the plaster Paris is inherently porous, the vacuum pulls through, so you get really, really high quality casts. And then you can take that while it's still scorching hot, and you can dump it in water, and the plaster Paris just falls apart, right? And you're left with a tree that's an exact replica of your wax tree, but now it's made of metal. And then you can prune off your coins, clean up the edges. You can put it into essentially some kind of cleaning system or polishing system and polish those coins. And if you want, you can even then, now that you've got nicely finished polished coins, you could then go ahead and paint them again, or if they're made of if they're made of copper or something, you could put them out and let them then tarnish and stuff. And so you can do quite a bit of things to it.
See, I thought you'd be using sand for that, but you're using plaster Paris.
Yeah. And it's a special type of plaster Paris. and everything. So you could use sand for that. The problem is that the mold is 3-dimensional, right? So you could then make a 2-dimensional mold, essentially, that you could make clean, casting sand parts to and everything, like you would in a foundry for more complicated pieces. This is more like what a jeweler does when they're making rings.
Yeah, so I work for a major manufacturer of mining equipment and construction equipment. So I've gone to a couple foundries. Of course, those parts are huge, but but the sand is tricky.
The sand is tricky. Whereas this plaster, this plaster system is very simple. It's a liquid when you pour it in. You then heat it, and you basically make it brittle and hard. But the heat then when it gets hit again, it'll allow it to just, I think it's called investment plaster. It'll just fall apart. And so this is a tried and true method for casting jewelry. And this is the first step in me wanting to make props along with my zines, not necessarily with Tales from the Smoking Wyrm, but we have a series of projects coming down the road that will have the capability of having props. And so my goal is to build a foundry so that I can make those props, because that's really cool and fun and artistic, and I enjoy that.
So I've got an idea for props for you.
What's that?
I don't know if that was a money making one, but this is what I've been thinking since so you said, since I saw what you're planning on doing in your Kickstarter, you made that mention of making these coins. Of course, once I see a thing, then every time I see other things that remind me of it, that comes to mind, I'd start saying, oh, he could do this, he could do that. So are you on the RuneQuest forum?
I'm not, but I love RuneQuest. I mean, it's a great game.
Well, he will pull up, Jeff Richard will a lot of times will pull up like real world, we'll say like ancient statues or whatever, but then he'll do a write-up of it. When I say statues, they could just be broken up, like maybe not huge statues, but just small, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not like fully like a full person, but they may be more rectangular shape with the hands maybe coming out and just showing some facial features. But
little figurines.
Yeah, well, but they may actually be like maybe a 5-foot statue or a 3-foot statue. I don't know what the size, or maybe an 8-foot statue, but they're not like the traditional, like, fully articulated person standing there. But
sure,
I just like, because he does a lot of pulls those, and then he'll I'll say appropriate, that's a bad word, but we'll say appropriates it kind of for his write-up for various gods or whatever. But I was like, you could do that stuff for a RuneQuest just as easy.
Oh, absolutely. So the idea is so think of little like gods, deity specific medallions or coins or all those rings. You can do rings this way. There's really lots of cool things you could do with this once you have the setup in place, and especially if you either know how to 3D sculpt or have a 3D sculpting partner who can do that part for you. And so, yeah, it's not lost on me that there is a ton of cool stuff we can do with this once we get there. And I have this, when I go to the Gen Cons and the Origins and even places like Gary Con and Gamehole Con and stuff, props are always of interest to players. They're something that players as a group really love to play with, right? And so now I can hopefully, if we get there, I think I haven't looked at the Kickstarter in the last couple hours, but as of this morning, we had about 70 pledges for coins.
Oh my goodness.
And so the first 24 hours got us 70 or 80. And then we have to hit a goal of 400 and everything for me to convert that wholeheartedly over, and everything will be metal then. And so that's the idea, is that even if you just get one coin, as long as we can get to that 400 coin goal, everybody gets metal coins. There's no resin coins then. So it's a different thing, but I'm hoping. I mean, to me, it feels very in the spirit of Kickstarter, right?
Oh, yes.
Kickstarter is about creators wanting to create something and saying, I'm resource shy, but you and I can work together by you providing the resource, and I'll provide you something else, and we can hopefully get there. And so I think it has a great future if I can get it worked out.
No, I think there is too. And obviously, and I think, different communities, not just RuneQuest, but I think there are probably certain communities where certain types of items would be, people get pretty excited about. And,
Yeah.
I think I think there's already probably a lot of markets too for even I'm not saying for you, but it's pretty apparent from board games that people want, the higher quality tchotchkes, that go along with the meeples and the various items. So I would say, yeah. And I think it's going to probably continue to be even more so as time goes on.
I think so too. And I think that it's a great complement to a physical product like an issue of Tale of the Smoking Wyrm or something, right? And or a little adventure or something where, especially where you've got some kind of MacGuffin that is the item that is driving, supposedly driving the plot, or is the object of everyone's desire, right? Those are just cool things. And so yeah, this story, I didn't write the adventure, Dieter Zimmerman did, but as we were working through production, we were identifying, okay, so here are the elements of the story that we really want to highlight. There's like 7 or 8 really cool individual unique creatures in it. We made miniatures of those, but after we made the card art, so this Kickstarter has a lot. This is a lot of me pushing my boundaries in a lot of different ways, right? I mean, I know how to make a saddle stitch product now. That's not the problem. So here we've got tarot size art cards so that the players can see the actual art for the creatures or the adversaries. It's like, here's what you're looking at. And we have environmental cards kind of, as going all the way back to Tomb of Horror or, Lost Caverns of Socanth or all of those classic TSR modules. And then, people like to play with miniatures. So I ran into this 3D sculptor, and we were able to work out a deal where he sculpted the miniatures for us.
So how do you run into a 3D sculptor?
I don't know.
As one is wont to do, and there's strolls across the Scottish countryside.
So the person I'm working with, his name is Ken Robkin. So Ken ran a Kickstarter for Valentine's Day that I saw on accident and really liked. And I recognize his name because he's actually in he's a pretty prolific illustrator for one of the H.P. Lovecraft Facebook groups. And so I backed it and got my products and everything out of it. And he has been teaching himself how to learn, 3D printing or 3D sculpting. And so he had a 3D sculpted kind of beholder type creature in this. And then and everything and some Valentine's cards that were fantasy driven. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So I got those and supported that. And I reached out to him to ask him a question about something. Somehow I messed up my pledge, which happens. And I asked him a question. I said, hey, can we, is this possible? And he came back and he's like, oh, I've seen your Kickstarters and everything. And I've followed your work on, I've seen some of the stuff you've put on RPG Zines group. And I really like what you do. And I was like, wow, it's like, I've seen your art and I really like what you do. And we just got to talking, and so that's how they're kind of serendipitous encounters. And actually it turns out he had done some really beautiful pencil illustrations of kind of Cthulhuoid monsters probably 2 years ago. And I had reached out to him at the time and said, I'd like to license these off of you. Do you do something like that? And he said, yes. And I had failed to get back to him not because I'd forgotten about him, because I was trying to get the article written that I was going to pair these with. And so, I hadn't, I just said, let me finish the article and I'll get back to you. And that hadn't happened yet. So we picked up that conversation and everything. He's a really great guy.
Yeah, I'm a really a sucker for pencil illustrations, and I know a lot of times they still look better once they're inked, but man, sometimes about a pencil to paper, there's a certain quality that's just it could be quite that's what I'm looking for. There's a rawness to it that's just absolutely, I think, kind of beautiful. That
Yeah, hard to capture and then reprint. You have to have a really good print values to do it, and a really good scanner. I think that pencil art sometimes looks better than the finished inked version, depending on how the inker inks. Right?
yeah,
If the inker is simply tracing, then usually they cannot capture the actual feel and sway of the line like they did when they first put it down on with pencil, which was usually kind of carefree and everything, right? And so it has a certain play out. Whereas if they're just tracing their lines when they're done, those are usually much more controlled. And so you miss some of that motion, which is what I think is really fascinating about pencil line work. And then you have some inkers who literally just block in pencil and then do most of their drawing in ink. And so that's usually a more freeform, type of process. So yeah, it just depends.
yeah. I'm
Certainly there
commissioning
are
some.
people who are
I'm,
good pencilers.
yeah, I'm commissioning a guy to do a cover for me, and maybe show me the pencils. It's like I know when it's finished, it's going to look probably better, but just like I just love those pencils.
Yeah, and I've run into that. I have artists. I commission artists all the time now, and I have this really bad habit of buying their art, not just buying it and using it in my product, but then buying the original because I'm like, that is so cool. I want to have that in my library of stuff, right? And so be careful. You'll spend all your profits on art. Um, but in a good way, you'll enrich your house. I mean, I'm
There you
sitting
go.
here in this little nook, and I've got 2 original Stefan Pogue pieces on my walls and everything and stuff, and those always make me happy.
Well, I'm in a point in my life where I'm trying to downscale. I want to eventually live a more minimalistic life, but we'll see how long it takes to get to that point.
Sure.
But yes, but you've got a house for it. But you got a house for that begs to have walls filled.
It does. Absolutely. So
And yeah, and having the 3D art. I mean, having the 3D miniatures. I mean, it's I just thought you're really starting to. It looks like now you're starting to put different things together. I don't know that was ever your intent to begin with when you kind of started out with the Smoking Wyrm, but it seems like one is a 3D in the miniatures, and I'm not sure how much that. It'd be interesting to know how much that plays into what people want, but you'll find out. It's how you figure things out is through Kickstarters.
that's right. And so that's something that Ken and I have talked about is, and I did a little polling. I did a little bit of work ahead of time and I asked the DCC Rocks Facebook group. I said, "Hey guys, I'm thinking about a project, and it would involve miniatures. And would you rather have them as STL files so you can print them yourself, or would you rather have them as resin prints, or would you rather have them in metal? Because I know how to cast miniatures in metal as well, and just simply through gravity pores." And the predominant number of people came back and said, "Oh, we would rather have resin and STL files." So I didn't offer a metal option for the miniatures this time, which is a good thing because some of them are pretty finicky. They've got some real detail.
I was noticing wherever that creature is, it has really long fingers.
Yeah,
I was like, well, that's going to be tricky. I thought, but maybe it's fine for the resin. I don't know, but it just seems like, wow, that's some pretty thin features there.
Right. And so we've been doing test casts of those, and we've been bulking the fingers up just a little bit so that they're not too thin and finicky. And so that's a whole level of detail and precision. That's why I'm happy that I've got a good 3D sculpting partner who knows how to do that stuff and
right.
get the final product. And not everybody has a 3D printer, right? And so that was something that I was pretty clear on, right away at the very beginning of this process, where I was like, look, we need to offer some way for people to get these without owning a printer, right? Because we are not running a Kickstarter for the 3D printing community. We're running a Kickstarter for the DCC community. And so the number of people who play DCC and have a 3D printer is going to be lower than if we were just sending this to the 3D printing community, where it's assumed you either have a 3D printer or you want one.
I think the problem too, I may be wrong on this, but I imagine the resin figures that you're going to get are going to be smoother in detail than probably the ones you'd print on your own. Is that correct?
They're printed with standard resin printers, probably, fairly high-end ones. The examples that I've got, and I'll have the final proof prints in about a week and a half.
No, I mean, as far as like if you had one in your home, more likely than not, it's not going to turn out as good as the ones that you're getting done.
No, because we're working with a very specific, resin that the sculptor has worked with in the past, so he knows exactly what he's going to get out of it, and everything. So
yeah, a commercial printer is going to be much different than the $300 one you bought, a month ago.
You can still but you can still get good results with that. You just need to know how to do it.
It sounds like people who want to do that, it requires a lot of playing around. And also I've noticed in times past, I don't know if it's still true with some of these prints, you need to do a bit of sanding in order to start getting things to smooth out, because there's still sometimes whatever that is, that stepping or whatever that occurs, that it can be the finish. You can't get a perfectly smooth like finish sometimes on like round surfaces. It just seems like there's a need to do a little bit of sanding here and there.
Yeah. And so that 3D printing community is pretty deep with knowledge. And if you're just starting out, it can be pretty intimidating, right? So yeah, there's a lot you can do, but that's a rabbit hole that you've got to go down. And so, yeah.
And your choice was either partner with somebody or to learn it yourself.
Yeah. So either I'm going to hire somebody to do it, in which case I'm paying somebody to do the art, but it can be inherently much more time consuming than two-dimensional art. Although two-dimensional art can take a long time too. Or learn it myself. And actually I did a run at that last summer. And I spent about 6 weeks working in Blender every hour, 5 days a week. I would spend like an hour a day working on it. And that quickly taught me that I would either need to spend another year mastering this, which I didn't have, or I would need to find somebody to partner with. So.
Yeah, and I think what it comes down to, and I may be wrong on this, but it seems to me like let's take people. You can get a great model for, let's say, Blender, but the human body to get a natural pose is probably much more difficult than it really appears. Even though it articulates like a person, to have a certain stance or certain pose actually look realistic is not necessarily that easy.
Right. And so that's where, I often work with illustrators who are trained in anatomy, right? I mean, they spend years learning how to do that and how to trick the eye to make it look like, that's a person. So they know lots of tricks of the trade. It's just like any skill, right? I mean, people have talent with art, just like people have talent with other things, but it's also a lot of repetitious practice and skill building.
Yeah, I had a theory this is probably like 4 years ago or so. I thought with illustrations being such an expensive part of a project, what if I just was to learn to use Blender and just create my own scenes and use that for art?
And you can do that, like almost that Sin City extreme lighting. I've seen people do that. I've seen courses on how to create that type of thing. That would look pretty cool. So you could create 3D environments and then light it and everything. And my experience after 6 weeks of playing with Blender is that would take me a year to two to figure out how to do that. And I would rather pay people and do it now. because
Yeah.
I don't have that many years left. So
yeah, and I didn't really put that much time into it, but I kind of came across that similar thing. It's like there's going to be a whole lot of energy and time spent.
yeah.
It's not going to be very efficient.
And what would you rather, so you as a zine producer, have to come up with what is it that is the best use of my time, no matter what, where is my time best spent? And then you should probably focus on that. And let other people do the things that they're good at. And so those partnerships are really great.
Yeah, it really is, because it's just like, and also, and especially too, if you can find people that are, likewise, you have things that they're needing as well.
Yep. Yeah.
Because he likes doing these things, but it's kind of like artists. It's like, a lot of times it's like, people who can write necessarily don't know how to put things together, and they don't do art. Same thing with artists. They don't write, but but then there's also people who want to put things together, and they seek out the artists and the writers. And sometimes somebody can do all three. Sometimes somebody can do two of the three. I mean, but in general, it's like, if you're needing a certain person to do a certain thing, there's probably somebody out there that likewise has something that they need that you can do as well.
True. Yeah. And I thoroughly believe that having partners on your projects just enriches the project, right? They bring a perspective. An illustrator brings a perspective that I don't have as a writer, or a new writer, somebody who has a diversely different background than me, brings a perspective that I don't have, and working with them creates cool things. And so so I'm a big proponent of that. I think that's a great thing to have.
Yeah, it's not, and I think it looks like this project, you're really starting to bring a number of people together. And also, who's the illustrator? I didn't recognize the illustrator for this.
The illustrator is a gentleman who's Spanish. His name is Jay Tanaka. And so Jay and I started working on those illustrations last August. We had the illustrations done for about several months before I ran into Ken Robkins, and we had already started doing, working on the adventure. So it's been a process. I think Dieter Zimmerman and I first spoke about the adventure last spring, so probably almost a year ago. I've been working on this. So,
the art is definitely very colorful, very stylized. It seems to be quite a bit different than, I think, probably I think it kind of makes me think a little bit of Vason, maybe a little bit, in a kind of almost horror, but also kind of the what's the word I'm looking for, where it's like an old style of like Hans Christian Andersen. What do you call Hans Christian Andersen? What do you call it? Folktale. It almost has like a folksy, horror, colorful. I don't know. It's just it's a very interesting vibe that's created. I mean, wherever it is you see it, it's like, I don't want to say it's like it's branding, but definitely it sets itself apart.
It does. He's done a great job. So, and Jay had done several things for us for Smoking Wyrm. We brought him on as to test a couple things, and he'd done great. And so he actually has a number of pieces in Tales from the Smoking Wyrm #4 that's currently going out to backers and everything. He's really good and not only that, but Jay and I seem to have a good relationship, and that I think is really important. He'll take criticism really well, constructive criticism, and I'm like, this is perfect, but can we alter this slightly, or
that may not be criticism. That's just you're saying, this is how I envision this a little differently.
Yeah, and sometimes he and I are very far apart on what and we have to kind of come together. But he's a great communicator, and he's very responsive. And so having that kind of a person who doesn't take offense at things and just is like, absolutely, I think, we can make this better. We can work on it. And so he has been a wonderful artist to work with. And then it's not just Jay, and Dieter and Ken, there's a lot of, my daughter Caitlin is she's a professional designer. And so bringing, so she had taken over art direction for me with this issue of issue 4 of Tales from the Smoking Wyrm. And she worked a lot on Hangman's Garden as well with Jay. And we went back and forth on a lot of that art together. And so her influence is there too. And so she has a totally different set of sensibilities. She's been designing professionally for children's books for HarperCollins for, I don't know, 2-3 years now.
Okay.
So she has that skill set too. And so, yeah, what my goal is to bring together teams that can accomplish what we need to accomplish. And so we can move forward with a product, right? With an idea. And it's the idea. And so you bring those people into the stage, and, I'm looking for people who, I just call it kind of elegant solutions, right? Who can solve a problem in an elegant way. It doesn't look clunky. It gets us through it, and it looks good. And so that's kind of the artistry of what it is that we do.
Well, I think true. I mean, if you just take what you just said, I think that's true of you, but any person that is wanting to have a business, your job really, and if you want to even like be freelance, whatever, your job really is to solve other people's problems.
Yes. Yeah.
And, I need an illustrator. Okay. But it's not just any illustrator. It's like things can come up or whatever it may be. And I think the idea too, is if you ever want to freelance, or people want to freelance or do whatever it is, you are there to solve problems.
Yeah. And so you mentioned Vasen a little while ago, because Jay's art kind of looks like some of the style of it. I was at Gen Con last year, and I was talking to the people in the Vasen booth and asking them how, because if you look at their books, most of their books are single artist books, right? You look at Vasen itself, it is one illustrator. There is not 2 illustrators. There's one illustrator on that book. You look at Alien, there's an illustrator on that book, and lots of movie shots too. You look at, was it Forgotten Kingdom, I think is the other game that they have.
Oh, Forbidden Lands.
That's one illustrator too. And so that's what they told me. They were like, oh, well, what we do is we find an illustrator that we can work with, and then we build a product around what they like to draw. Right. And so that company, was it Freelance or Free Blade or whatever it is?
Free League.
Yeah, Free League. They are taking a very different approach. They're saying the art is paramountly important because it's the thing that the people interact with the most.
That's unifying too, when it's all the same.
Yeah. And so that's no different than hiring Tony DiDerlizzi to do, the planar books, the Planescape stuff. Right. And Tony DiDerlizzi was hired for like a 2-year contract where they're like, you're going to be the sole artist on these books for the first 2 years. And the same thing was with Brom, with Dark Sun, right? Brom was the sole artist on those books for the first year or so, and stuff. So, that's TSR kind of pioneered that. But it was there before. Some of the like Victory games, when they did James Bond, one artist, and it's beautiful.
Well, I'm thinking, when you're making that statement, I don't recall there really being many projects or products that had a single or even a low number of contributors. I was looking through my Traveler Black Book, the compilation Black Book, where they actually put art into it, and there's like 8 illustrators in there, and they vary in style from ink scribblings to to more elaborate pieces. And I think it fits, but it's not unifying.
Right. And it's the same thing with TSR. Look at the way they built the DMG monster manual. There's a couple of interviews now on, I think it was on Eye of the Beholder. Diesel was talking about the way art assignments were given out for the monster manuals. And he was like, you would get 10 monsters at a time, and you would be told, do these. And then the person next to you would get the next 10 monsters, and then when you were done, you would hand in your art, and then they would give you 10 more monsters. Right. And so there are big chunks of runs where an artist, and the same thing was true for Deities and Demigods, right? artists were hired for a specific pantheon. And so that's where it's beginning to gel a little more. And so yeah, I think when I get into, one of the things that we're going to do beyond Tales from the Smoking Wyrm, which is a collaborative kind of like Dragon magazine type style approach, right? It has lots of different articles and it has lots of different art. And we like mixing artists up within the same article, because that's kind of cool. And but then there are other projects like the Hangman's Garden that effectively have one artist and one cartographer. So,
well, I think sometimes it's so like it's logistics. It's like how was I talking to? Oh, it was Steve, or it was Phil Reed. We said like they had a month to put together the book. Like, and it's like,
yeah.
If you've got 100 illustrations, you just have a month, and you say, okay, there you go. I mean, you can't have one illustrator doing it all. To actually have one illustrator be able to produce enough work in time to be ready to publish, you need to plan it out ahead of time. That's something that you don't just say, okay, who's available this month? It's like
that's exactly
crazy.
True. And so with like Tales of the Smoking Wyrm, we are trying ultimately to get to 4 issues a year. And I have 4 issues nearly completed in the manuscript phase. We don't hand out art assignments until we have a layout done. And then we've tried, starting with issue 3 and 4 worked really well, where we would hand out literally, PDFs of the pages and say, your art needs to fit this page. And that's an attempt by Caitlin, my designer, to make the design process go faster, the layout process go faster at the end when you're putting all the pieces together. You don't get in art and you're like, this totally does not fit. But it also allows that artist to then creatively fill that space, which I find gives you better art. And so, but it's a more than one person job, because they get that and they know we have about a month before we're going to go to Kickstarter on this. So we need to turn around all the art assignments pretty quickly. So you need lots of people.
Yeah. So I think my goal, I got another project I'm toying around with, but it'd be doing a bestiary.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to be I'll tell you about later, but it's basically going through, I'm just going to go through them through the alphabet, do it in a zine. And then when it's all said and done, print it out as a perfect bound book.
Oh, okay.
But the idea would be that I can just work on it, put out several a year, 2 or 3 a year, but I can also have one artist work on it, and it's not a tremendous workload. So I'm not asking for 120 illustrations. I'm only asking for 14 this time, 20 that time, 24 another time. And that way I think I can kind of, but the other danger is like, you got to make sure that they're with you the whole time.
Right. And I'm actually working on, we're working on our first kind of setting based setup. So I've got a setting that's going to come out, pseudo setting. It'll come out in small pieces. And I've been working on a kind of a monster manual type approach too. More ecological fantasy. Since I have a biology background, I really like to build adversaries that are well suited to their environment and really explore what those relationships look like. So, but I agree with you. It's, what I was envisioning of was like a travel log. This is an adventurer who is writing back, like almost like sending things back to the newspaper, right? Here are the monsters I encountered on the trip. And here's a little bit of the story, and everything. And so that kind of frames it. And it makes those, what I'm hoping is it then turns those things into props themselves, right? So you can almost have it as a prop setup. Here's the travel log of this guy and everything. You can almost hand those out at the table. So
you're talking about, you said about trying to have 4, did you say 4 issues of the Traveling Wyrm per year? Is that what you said you're trying to go to?
Yeah. The goal is to get
Smoking Wyrm.
4 issues of Smoking Wyrm a year.
Yeah. I start out this year with high ambitions.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm not meeting them. I will, there are circumstances to blame, but ultimately that's not all. A lot of it's me. So I think the only person I know that's really been, there's a couple of people who's been very good about putting stuff out continue, but how are you going to get 4 this year?
I'll at least get 3. Yeah. The 4th might come at the very end of the year, might not get out till January, but I literally have finished manuscripts for 3 of those issues already. Right. Every article is written. They're down to final proof editing and stuff like that.
That's incredible.
And so even though sometimes it looks like we're very slow to get things done, in the background, I'm working, right? I'm writing, I'm working with other people to, we've hired a couple of writers this time to write very specific pieces and to collaborate with us. And I've got a couple of friends, we started out as kind of a 3-man writing team. Brian Gilkison, John Olszewski, and myself, and I'm kind of the front person on all that. And so I do the predominant amount of writing, but it was a 3-person brainchild for the original issue. And then you just have to keep plugging away. It's a skill that you learn how to produce a certain amount of volume. And then, so think of it as ramping it up, right? I sit down on a week and I'm like, okay, on this week, I'm going to write 1,000 words or 3,000 words, or I'm going to create 4 monsters. Like the month of February, I basically wrote a monster a day. And that was, and so it was a question of, could I get through all of that? And then you build that skill, and then you've got to build all the logistic skills behind it that help then move that manuscript down the line. So.
Well, I think the key also too is if you're also able to gather people to either also assist and also to do the work,
right?
And that helps a lot, because I know for me it's like writing is okay, but it's very inefficient, time wise for me.
Well, as far as I can tell, writing is inefficient anyway, right? And so I mean, I know inherently what I want that thing to be, and then getting it out on the page is a totally different adventure, right? I mean, so especially with DCC, I mean, some of the stuff that we're building has a lot of variability in it, right? So it's like, oh, I want to build this type of, I'm like I said, I'm working from an ecological framework on these monsters, and sometimes I want a monster that's essentially an encounter, but has other monsters associated with it, other creatures associated with it. Think of it as it's really cool to climb a big tree, but other things live in the big tree too, right? And so I can write stats for a big tree, but the big tree is only really interesting by the other things that live in it, or the things that have crashed into it, or the things you might encounter in it. And so I've been looking at slightly more complicated adversaries, and how does that, and then how do you make each one uniquely different, because different things live in different trees.
Well, I think too, it's like, if you really want to, the natural world is very creepy.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I love one of my favorite things to do is sit down in the evening with my wife and my kids, if they want to watch them. And we watch, I'm a huge fan of David Attenborough. And since I was a kid, and I'll let you know a little secret, this is how big a fan I was. In 2nd grade, I dressed up as David Attenborough for Halloween. Right? That's dedication from an 8-year-old. And so I love watching natural history shows that highlight the behaviors and the abilities of different creatures. And I'll sit down and watch an invertebrate one, and I'll have 6 or 7 monster ideas by the time I'm done. I sit there with a pen and pencil, and I just make notes. Oh yeah, that's a cool idea. That's a cool idea. That's a cool idea. And then I take 10 minutes at the very end, flesh them out, so that I know I will be able to look back at that scribbled note, 3 months later, and know what I'm talking about. And yeah. So the same thing is true when I read about, pick up a textbook on animal behavior or something like that and read that. Yeah, very cool stuff. And I'm influenced by that stuff, because if you look at the Kickstarter right now is a Smoking Wyrm monograph, right? it's meant to be like almost like an academic publication, where we are really exploring a topic in depth.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because I think it's very easy to, trying to think you have to go into the wild and the crazy, but really in your backyard, things are just pretty messed up. As far as the plants, the animals, the fungus, everything is just like, it is just a weird thing that's going on.
There is a lot of cool stuff going on back there, right? So you get a wasp and you make it giant, and then you're like, this is an ichneumon type wasp, and they have long proboscis that they actually lay and parasitize creatures with by laying their eggs in them. And then you think about, okay, now I've got a giant wasp that is looking for prey to parasitize. Well, what if they're looking for adventurers to parasitize, right? Yeah. And so you start thinking about that. Well, this comes out of the middle of nowhere and it picks up an adventurer and it pierces them and everything and lays an egg and then it leaves, right? And the adventurer, the actual monster is the thing that's now growing inside of you. You now have the movie Alien.
Yeah.
Right? and it didn't take you much to get there. And so yeah, or I was working with spiders, and I was think of the difference between spiders and how they catch prey, and how they create silk, and there are different types of silk, and silk is meant for some spiders produce many different types of silk. Some spiders only produce one type of silk. Sometimes their behaviors in silk production. Spiders have little hairs on their arms. They're called Circe, and they will sit there and they will comb the silk to create tension in it and everything to create springs. And so I created these. I've been working kind of on a Spelljammer type game right now, is where my characters are they're flying around in the air with a ship. And I was like, it'd be really cool if you had these spiders that came on and they basically hit on the underside of your ship, and at night, they would come up and they would find somebody unaware, and they would envenom him and then drag him under the ship and basically stitch him to the ship, right? And then just encase him there as a food source. And so what you've got is you've got this kind of mystery. Well, where'd Bob go? Well, nobody knows where Bob is. Did Bob fall off the ship? What happened to Bob? And it turns out he's upside down on the bottom of the ship, and slowly you're losing characters. And I was like, this one monster can carry an entire game session. So yeah, you really have to think about what it is that real creatures can do in the real world,
which could be more interesting than it breathes fire.
Yeah. Yeah, which is still pretty interesting. I mean, don't get me wrong.
No, but it's pretty mundane. But sometimes the mundane is what's exotic. We just don't realize it.
So, especially when you take little things and make them big.
I know that's the only thing I've been doing with for the bestiary for the post-apocalyptic stuff. It's like, okay, and also I was even thinking too, for what I'm working on is just working on just rewriting up the like the SRD for old school essentials. But if you take like a giant ant, okay, what do you really do with a giant? Well, there's a lot of things you can do, I guess, with a giant ant, but we don't really think about it because all we think about is, it shows up, you stick a dagger in it, and then you move on. But it's like,
so think about what ants do. So then you have to think about, well, what do ants do, right? And so there are worker ants. There are ants designed to carry things. There are warrior ants, whose heads are 3 times, 4 times the size of a normal ant. There are ants who are scouts, right? And they go out and find a food source and then they lay a trail. And so you can look at that and say, well, ants can suddenly be very, very scary if they're giant and very dynamic. The scout ant looks like a leopard, right? It moves fast. It does all these cool things. The carrier worker ant, they're very strong and they can lift up a couple people at a time and carry them back. Right. And then the fighter ant, the warrior ant, man, you do not want to get bit by it. Ants have, they spray formic acid. It's an amazing, variety of things that ants do. Yeah. And everything. So yeah, absolutely. You should never, I don't need to go anywhere past, a book on animals to get inspired to write monsters. They're right there.
Yeah, they are. And I think we just always seem to want to go to the fantastical. And again, it's right there. And I think it can be interesting, like, the problem solving. It's like, maybe, the encounter isn't that you fight the dumb thing, but how do you get past them?
Yeah. Because they have desires and goals, right?
Yeah.
These are real creatures. So one of the things I've been thinking about, like I said, my group is currently gaming in a Spelljammer type, in the air. And I was like, so what do you encounter in the sky? Right. And how does that work? And what is the sky like? And everything. And so, I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And, you realize very quickly that sky is kind of like the open ocean, that there's going to be features, there's going to be, clouds. So there's moisture. So certain things promulgate around moisture. And then there are big barren stretches, and there's wind, and there's layers. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the sky you don't think about. And then how could animals in a fictional type setting, how could they take advantage of that? What would that look like? Right. And you just start that thought experiment and take it to its logical conclusion with biology, and then say, okay, now how can I stretch the biology into the fantastic to get some even weirder stuff? But you don't have to go very far. There are plants with leaves that are like bladders, and they fill with gas, and you could very easily see plants floating in the air, right?
Yeah.
And then once you have plants floating in the air, there are the things that live on those plants, and there are the things that eat those things that live on the plants, right? And stuff. So yeah, it's
Well, I was kind of thinking about the same thing with Star Frontiers. They have those giant mass. I can't remember what the plant thing is called that floats around, shoots electricity.
Oh, I don't remember. I played, I had Star Frontiers in the 80s. I somehow don't have it anymore. I don't know if I got rid of it or if I lost it or lent it to somebody. And I literally just purchased Star Frontiers and the Starhawks or whatever supplement for it just about a month ago, and I haven't had time to reread it. But
I thought those things could be like, kind of like you're saying, it's like it could be a mass of plants to say on water. Maybe they can crack water and get hydrogen. They use the hydrogen to float. But then maybe people utilize that for travel. I don't know. I mean, there could be kind of some interesting things with a large mass of plants will float and do stuff. Maybe that's a use for that.
Absolutely. So, or think about this: you have fantastic creatures that live in the sky, right? Cloud giants. Well, what happens when cloud giants die? I just actually, my party, in my game, they had to go visit the corpse of a cloud giant to recover precious resources off of it, in order to then refine that into fuel. And so there's this substance called what's it called? It's not Genegris. That's what I was using. There is, basically whale poop, and it ages, and as it ages, it becomes incredibly expensive, right? And so there are people who go out on the open ocean looking for whale poop, and the older the whale poop is, the more expensive it is. And
so what you're saying is true in our world?
It's true. This is real, right? This is real. Perfume is partially made from the volatilized portions of this whale poop.
Okay,
right?
so wait a minute. We need to back up. Okay, you're going too far too fast.
Sorry.
So a whale takes a dump in the ocean.
Yep.
And then does it float?
It floats. Yeah.
Here,
let me get the name of the. Let's look this up. So I make sure I'm not. What's the name? Ambergris, right? And so ambergris, which is whale excretion, it's an ultra rare substance that can fetch thousands of dollars per ounce.
Ultra rare. Why is it
ultra rare? Because whales poop and it just goes and you got to go find it in the ocean.
But what about the zoos?
There are no whales in zoos. Well, that's not true. There's a couple of whale sharks, but there are very few whales in a zoo.
So it's not like it. So it has to be okay. So it could be like a killer whale.
Not like a killer whale. Yeah. And so this like, it's like humpback whales produce this, and blue whales produce this and stuff. And so this ambergris, there are people who go out looking for it. Sometimes it washes up on the beach, and after it comes out, it oxidizes and changes, and then it's ultimately used by the perfume industry. So it's super expensive. So I took that concept and I was like, wouldn't it be really cool if you were up in the sky and you have cloud giants, right? And the cloud giants, when they die, their bodies become worth things, like their bones, they can float, right?
Right.
Because they're cloud giants. So their bones literally have the ability to float. So you could powderize bone giant bones, and then you could use it as a paste and basically create, symbologies on your ship that help levitate your ship.
Or you could make it out of their bones, and like the ribbing for of the boat itself would be that.
So the same thing with this ambergris. I was like, what if we created genegris, which is like cloud giant poop that over time it hardens and it changes and it oxidizes, and this is a fuel source, right?
And it's rare because they're normally constipated.
Yeah, or whatever, or they're not that many cloud giants, and so people are out there looking for this stuff, right? So you have to create like a market.
Well, but if you go back to the papacy back in the Middle Ages, their feces was captured.
Yeah,
they would catch it and then they would make it into whatever and sell it to the masses. So you're really not that far off from some of the stuff.
So all you do is sit there and have a thought experiment on what is in here, what's in the sky, and what can I do, and what cool things can people encounter. And it's a lot of fun.
So so the Fan of the Fly God does center a lot around scat, but yes,
as any good carrion, every carrion fly you know of, right?
All of them. Everyone I know.
All of them. They're also flies that come to feces, right?
Oh yeah.
And so those same flies that and then they also come to your pie when you leave it in the window. All those flies are also come to feces without a problem. Yeah, absolutely.
But now this could be a different. I mean, the Storm King's thunder could be.
You get very scatological there.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it's time to go gather. I've heard the thunder.
Yep. So,
but the thing is, like, so this whale poop, this
ambergris.
We got to make it sound nice. So obviously we give a nice term.
That's right.
So I collect ambergris. I collect ambergris. So I can believe, in my mind, I have no problems understanding or believing how it can be part of the perfume industry. But I don't know how it got started. Like, who's the first person who said, you know what?
I often wonder that question for other things too. But yeah, who's the first person who found the whale poop on the beach and was like, first, let me pick this up because it's interesting. Yeah. Secondly, I'm going to smell it and see what it is. And maybe I could use this in perfume, so how do you get, it's fascinating, right? Yeah, absolutely. But if you think about it, almost anything that we eat, you have to look at it and say, who thought of that first? What was the moment when someone said, yeah, radishes, I think that's a good food source, right? Or, there's a pig over there.
Yeah.
If I could get past the tusks, this could be a good afternoon, right? Barbecue. So you just, I once read a book on the history of salt. Actually, I listened to it on Audible while I was doing dishes in the morning for about 2 weeks. And it's fascinating what people have done to get salt. And and how they've created, how they farm for salt and stuff.
Yeah.
Like this. And how Tabasco is an off product of salt, salt production in Louisiana, and things like this, natural salt licks. And so when you really drill down into how something came to be and why people consume it or use it or hang out with it and everything. It's a fascinating story every time. I've never not been amused by that. You never hear the story about it and you go, oh, well, that's boring. It's always fascinating. So those are interesting things. I like bringing that stuff up, and I like putting my players in unique situations with their characters, So I truly believe that creates, just having a unique situation creates a unique game. And so, but I was, maybe I'm strange. I ran a 3 or 4 year campaign in D&D second edition off of, the players were hired. Basically they were the last, there was a war that was going on. The economy needed continual light coins. The city had continual light coins in these little pouches down in the sewer system, but it was more expensive it was cheaper to go and produce an alternative type of continual light coin, because these were getting stolen. So they created essentially continual light washers that you could pound into the wall so they couldn't be stolen, because people were stealing the coins and sending them to their family members on the front line because they needed them when they were like going through these tunnel systems and fighting. And so the entire economy had been undone by this whole problem. And the characters were simply hired to change out the continual light coins. That was their whole job. And that lasted 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, because I guess when you start dealing with that, you're right, because all of a sudden it's money that becomes scarce, and it's becomes scarce because it's being utilized elsewhere.
Right. And
your ability to produce it is limited.
Yep. And it's being taken out of the sewer system, which makes the sewer system unsafe, which means that unsavory types can use it in ways that the city doesn't want them to use it. And so not only do you have a job, you have a physical job of replacing continual light coins, you have people wanting to bribe you and buy the continual light coins off of you, even though you've been hired to hand them over. And so there's a whole bunch of like political machinations that go on with this simple job.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to even, where I think they, governments would try to enforce their currency, even though the population didn't want it.
Yep. Yeah. So there's a lot of fun you can do with that, right? I mean, so that's an abstract game that gives the players very different motivations and everything. And they would move from district to district and find different district managers who had different motivations and wanted different things from them. And so there was a lot of role-playing opportunities. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. And I think we've truly just rambled now for a while.
Yeah, because where we started, I think we wound up with Goonies.
Yeah.
They were down in the tunnels, and there was a wishing well. Yep. And there's all these bunnies. So I think we've probably rambled to the point of hitting the time-space continuum.
Absolutely. But it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Me too. And yeah, we did start out, I guess, where we start. We started with D&D being an Americanized version of a game, or at least seen through Americans. I may say Americans from the United States.
Yep.
I can't speak for Mexico and Canada.
True.
To all the way to Well Poop, and finally Goonies. Yeah. I feel complete.
Yeah, I think we've come full circle for the day.
Well, thanks for joining me, Trevor, and
absolutely
on again sometime soon.
All right, sounds good, Jeff.
Yeah, one I want to talk to you sometime about is your. I think you bought some printing press material.
Tons of printing press material.
We need to talk about that sometime. So it's
sure. Well, one of the things I've been doing, so actually I am putting some of that material to work in the next week or two. Well, once I come back from GaryCon, I have been building a workbench to sit I have 2 foil stamping machines. These are foil stamping machines from the 1920s, 1930s. As a matter of fact, I found out one of them. I found this guy somewhere in California who deals with this one brand of foil stamper that isn't in production anymore, but he can custom make the parts for it. And his name was Charlie. And so Charlie was like, he's like, oh, he's like, I told him, I'm like, I have this Kensal. It's a model number 11L. It's a hot foil stamper. And he's like, oh, he's like, do you know? And he rattles off all this information about the Kensal 11. He's like, the L though, he's like, do you know what the L was originally used for? And I said, no, I have no idea. He's like, it wasn't used. I said, I'm using it for bookbinding and stuff like this. And he's like, oh, it was used for television. And I was like, really? He said, yeah. He's like, the L was something they could have on set when they needed to print cards, before they had teleprompters. They would foil the cards so you could see them in the dim light. They would reflect off the light so that people who were reading the cards could see them at a distance in the darkened room. He's like, so you would literally hot foil stamp live while you were working, and you would be putting these teleprompter cards up that had been hot foil stamped with this Kensal 11. He's like, that's what your stamper was originally designed to do, and everything. So yeah, so I've got those, and I'm going to be using those for the current Hangman's Garden. So I'm actually going to order my own custom foil stamps and stamp an envelope that goes on the inside.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. This is actually a complicated book. It has a fold-in pocket in the back, and then it has another pocket that goes on top of it. The one bigger pocket holds the environmental cards, and the little pocket holds the tarot size cards. And so everything is held right there and contained inside the book.
Excellent. That is very cool.
Yeah. So whenever you want to talk about that, it's finally getting up and running. It's weather's been cold, and I work outside, just in my driveway, right off my porch when I'm doing this kind of woodworking to build, because I'm building the benches from scratch. And so I've only been able to do it as the weather is good, but the last couple of weeks have been great. So I've finally gotten all the bench, and I needed to make the bench modular so it could move in. I could move it when I needed to and stuff. And so I should have it. I'm actually hoping to do the first test assembly of the whole bench on Sunday. So
yeah, I do some videos of that.
Yeah, it'd be cool. So it's all done with hand doweled. There's no screws or anything in it. It's all I basically took 4x4s and made a whole system. So
cool.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing, but those are the things that keep me entertained.
Yeah, that's there's no shortage of projects when you start doing this kind of stuff.
And there's not, so that we're building a garage right now, and then the second floor of the garage will become my workshop, which is where I'll do all the bookbinding work. I will do eventually I will probably hand assemble my own books, and have probably I'll buy a printing press eventually and do them on an offset press myself. And so that's a couple years down the road, but it's a weird compulsion. I like the work other people do. I like printers, and I like having those conversations, but ultimately I really would like to have the control of it myself, and be able to walk out and print it myself. And, I spent most of my high school career learning how to print and work off of what's called I think it was an AB Dick 900 offset printing press, little printing press that fits, it's like half the size of a VW Bug. And so that's where I'm kind of headed, I think.
Oh, cool. Yeah. We'll have to discuss more in detail later.
Sounds good.
And we'll I guess we'll catch up with each other either later or through chat or something. So
yeah. Are you going to be at GaryCon?
No.
The
other thing I was going to say, I thought about going. We're kind of making plans to go to North Texas. Are you planning on to North Texas?
Boy, I've been thinking about it. I actually have to go out to California and pick up a couple of incubators in June. And so late May, June. And so I was hoping to kind of work all that in where I was like coming through Texas right at the beginning of June. So I could make multiple uses of that trip. I'm not sure how it's going to work. I'm still in the planning process. I'd love to go, but I'm not sure.
I was planning on it, but it sounds like there may be an opportunity at work to go to Ireland for an extended period of time.
I would go to Ireland first.
Yeah. So
yeah. Especially, is it at June?
I don't know. So I was just told by my boss that there was a situation arising where they're going to need people there to, and I don't know any dates. I don't know for how long, but I imagine it's going to be, I don't know when it's going to be. So, or if they'll ask me, but there's a reasonable chance.
So if it's in the spring and it's after maybe the first week of May, all the way up until the first or second week of June, the best weather in the UK is during that time period.
Okay.
So, you can get these really nice, gloriously dry weeks where there's lots of sun, but it's in the 60s and maybe the 70s, but usually the 60s. Nights are in the 50s or the 40s. It hasn't gotten, the summers can get hot, but they can be wet. And so I have found really good luck going in May and June. I used to go, when I was doing my study abroad and everything, I used to leave basically about May 12th and I would be gone until about June 10th. And so really good weather most of the time. And
so we'll see. So if we don't do that, then I should be there.
Sounds good. Well,
if not that, then it'd be Game Hole Con.
That's right. So we'll see how it goes. All right, man.
We will. Take care, man.
You too. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.